4 in the NFL has come and gone, and once again, I had a pretty odd week, and arguably should have been 3 for 5 in best bets, but what do you know? Zach Wilson decided to have the best game of his career and the Jets covered. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, just let's get right into my week 4 NFL recap. I ended up going 12-4 in the money line, which puts me into straight up money line predictions this year. 42-22 through 4 weeks, 2 for 5 in best bets. I hit Jacksonville -3 against Atlanta. I hit Seattle last night +1.5 against the Giants. Missed Pittsburgh against Houston. Barely missed Indy against the Rams. It looked like that was a miss from start to finish. Indy came back, almost pulled it off. And then obviously Kansas City did not cover the 9.5, even though they should have. They were up 17-0 in the first quarter against the Jets. 2 for 5 in best bets. That does put me at 13 for 20, though, so far on the year, which, again, I feel like, we could be 15 for 20. Missed a couple bets in week 1 that could have went our way. Missed a couple bets in week 4 that could have went our way. Overall, having a pretty good year. Thursday Night Football. Now, the Lions beat the Packers 34-20. This game was not close. The Lions were up 27-3 going into halftime. They dominated the second half. They took their foot off the pedal, but they proved once again for the second straight year of going into Lambeau and taking out the Packers, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, whether it's Jordan Love, the Detroit Lions now. And I know Minnesota got their first win of the year. We saw Chicago have the blown lead against Denver on Sunday. Green Bay does not look very good. Jordan Love cannot play outside of the Bears week 1. 4 consistent quarters of football. Atlanta, he had a good first half. New Orleans, he had a good fourth quarter. And in this, Detroit game, it was a good second half in a blowout. But Green Bay doesn't have very good skill position players. Aaron Jones went down again. They can't run the football without Aaron Jones. A.J. Dillon has not been productive all season long. And so this Lions team is now 3-1. And the team that we all thought should be favored to win the NFC North coming into the year are playing really good football. Jared Goff, when he's on time, when he's in that rhythm, and that Ben Johnson offense, he's a very good quarterback. David Montgomery, a great game, obviously, Thursday night with the 3 touchdowns. You had in Gibbs, the running back they drafted, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams about to come back with Josh Reynolds, and a Laporta kid at tight end. The Lions are very good offensively, as we talked about all offseason. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Aiden Hutchinson, now they got the rookie Campbell they drafted out of Iowa. They don't have a lot of defensive pieces, but they're certainly a very good football team. Speaking of a team that I was questionable of going into the year, that being the Atlanta Falcons. A lot of people looked at their schedule. Vegas put their over-under at 8.5. It was one of my best bets going into the year. I said take the under on Atlanta because I do not trust Desmond Ridder. I do not think he is the franchise quarterback of the future. And to this point, Brandon has been proven right because Atlanta's offense looks bad. I am shocked with how much they're not using Bijan Robinson. And yes, he got over 100 yards. And yes, he caught a couple passes. And you guys know how I feel about running backs. I always feel like running back is a rotational position. But I think Atlanta is making it more and more obvious that when Tyler Algier comes into the game, they're giving him the football and defenses just sort of stack the box. And there is a difference between, a very special running back and a good running back. And I've always said, what teams have 2 running backs or 3 running backs or 1 great running back? Your Tennessees, your Giants, your Atlantas, teams that don't have great quarterback play that need to rely more heavily on the run game. Bijan Robinson is your best offensive player. Atlanta, I advise you use him more, as they apparently like Jonnu Smith more than Kyle Pitts. Who knew? Jacksonville did not look great. Outside of a pick 6 in this game, they put up 16 points offensively. But again, Atlanta's not very good. Doug Peterson in September, his teams get better as the season goes on. So I really want to see now Jacksonville bounce back, as they are going to be in London again next week. This time it's going to be a road game, but they continue to stay in London. They take on the Bills. It's a very challenging matchup. Very interesting game. I haven't seen the line for it come out yet, I would guess Buffalo probably favored by 3 or 4 points. We don't really know how Jacksonville is going to respond being there 2 weeks in London. It's almost like a home game, obviously, but it's not. Do they want to just get off the bus? Do they get rolled over? Or do they come out? Do they play well? It'll be interesting to see. This next game was a reason why preseason really doesn't matter. Dorian Thompson-Robinson looked very good in the preseason against vanilla defenses. He could not read a defense against the Ravens. Lamar Jackson and crew dominated the Browns 28-3. And I said going into the year, a lot of people I think were kind of underestimating Baltimore. They were all banking on Lamar to get hurt and everybody to get hurt, and Baltimore to do what seemingly Baltimore does. But without Odell Beckham, obviously J.K. Dobbins still out. They still had a couple offensive linemen out. Baltimore went in there. They dominated. They ran the ball. They took apart the Browns offense, who could not get anything going in the passing game. It sounded like Deshaun Watson could have played. According to Kevin Stefanski, he was cleared. It was Deshaun Watson's decision to not play, which is a very curious one. I think Watson wants to get healthy going into the bye week, knowing it is this week. You got San Francisco at home the next week. We'll see if that does put any strain on the locker room, because this was a divisional game. The Browns are now 1-2 in the division. They're 2-2 overall. And when we look back early in the season, we saw that Cincinnati, Baltimore, Pittsburgh stretch, 3 out of the first 4 games for the Browns. We all said at the very least the Browns had to be 2-2, which they are. Obviously beating Cincinnati in week 1, and we don't know what to make of Cincinnati right now, but we do know Baltimore, as long as everybody stays healthy, seems to be the clear driver's seat, in my opinion, in the division. I said Washington was going to give Philadelphia everything that they could handle, and boy, was I right. It came down to the final play of the game. Sam Howell connecting with Dotson on that touchdown pass. Washington making the wrong decision to go for 1 instead of trying to win the game. Once again, a defensive coach over an offensive coach. If Eric Bieniemy was the head coach in that situation, I almost guarantee you Washington would have went for the game winner. Regardless, I mean, Sam Howell played well. Washington always plays well against the Philadelphia Eagles because they have the formula. Defensively, they do have a top 5 defensive line in the National Football League. They can bother the offensive line a little bit, and that show coverage can give the Eagles some problems. The once Philadelphia figured it out in the second half, really the issue for Philly is Washington is really good because they have 3 really good receivers, and Curtis Samuel, Dotson, Terry McLaurin. They can run the ball with Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson. They have a lot of weapons. Philadelphia started blitzing in the second half. They started to get home a little bit more, and that's the key to these games as always. If Washington can run the ball, if they can move the ball, if they can put up points, like they did at Philadelphia last year, they can beat the Eagles because these two teams are built very similar. The difference is Philadelphia has Jalen Hurts. They have A.J. Brown. They have Devontae Smith. They have the over-the-top game. Washington, obviously, has Sam Howell at quarterback. And there's a lot of talk out there. Philadelphia has not played well, yet they're 4-0. The Eagles have won in a lot of different ways. Obviously, against New England, it was a gritty, grind it out, get the lead early, hang on type of game. Minnesota, it was run the ball down their throat. Tampa, it was getting turnovers, running the ball, Jalen making a couple of big plays. And then this past week, it was Jalen in the passing game, finally putting the team on their back. So I feel like the Eagles have won in 4 different ways, which I think is going to be great for them moving forward. Cincinnati looked awful. This game I got wrong. I thought Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase were going to heat up again. Joe Burrow does not look right. The Bengals do not look right. Tennessee was embarrassed the week before by the Browns. They came out and embarrassed Cincinnati. This game was pretty much over, 5 minutes in, like some of these other games this weekend. Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry, who even threw the ball in for a touchdown. Tennessee just out physical. They clamped down on Cincinnati defensively. And Cincinnati does not look right. We've seen this, 3 out of the last 4 years for Cincinnati, where they start off 1-3 or 2-3. They look awful, and then they bounce back. The difference is, though, Joe Burrow was getting healthy last year. Joe Burrow this year does not seem to be healthy. I believe that they do play Arizona this week. Correct me if I'm wrong. but I know they got Seattle, San Francisco. I know they got some other tough teams down there on that schedule. So they better get a win here in the next couple of weeks, or things could look bleak for Cincinnati. Pittsburgh, Kenny Pickett, once again inconsistent. They got rattled by a defensive coach in DeMeco Ryans, and CJ Stroud looks better than Kenny Pickett at every single level. This was shocking to me because Houston, I was down on them the first 2 weeks. I liked them coming into the year. I thought they were going to win games. I had them at 7-10. The first 2 weeks, though, man, when they went up against, Baltimore, and then I believe at home they went up against Indy and they looked horrible. Last couple of weeks, obviously, Jacksonville on the road, back home against Pittsburgh. CJ Stroud has looked like a different player. Tank Dell and Nico Collins are getting involved offensively. Dameon Pierce is still not had a breakout game yet, and Houston is 2-2. We know there's going to be up and downs with CJ Stroud. At this point, Kenny Pickett in year 2, he's not getting better. I don't think it's a personnel problem. I think it's a coaching problem. I think Pittsburgh needs a new offensive coordinator. All right, the coach looked lifeless for about 2 quarters and a half, and then midway through the third quarter, Anthony Richardson does what Anthony Richardson does, and it's why I thought Anthony Richardson, even over Bryce Young, had the highest ceiling coming into the 2023 NFL Draft, especially when he was drafted by Indianapolis, because Shane Steichen is there, and I know what Steichen did with Justin Herbert with the Chargers, Jalen Hurts with the Eagles, and you just saw it, man. They did not have a lot of success passing. Michael Pittman obviously struggled. This was a game where you could argue they missed Jonathan Taylor, but then they just started in the tight ends, man. Mo Alie-Cox had a big second half. They started to figure out Matthew Stafford in that passing game, and then obviously Puka Nacua came through at the end. The game-winning walk-off touchdown. Listen, Nacua has broke through and given the Rams another wide receiver target. Well, Cooper Kupp has been out that we did not think they could have. As long as Matthew Stafford stays upright, the Rams are going to be in games. They get Cooper Kupp back. They now play the Eagles this week, and all of a sudden, a very interesting game in Los Angeles. I think the Eagles win. I think it's going to be closer than a lot of people think with Cooper Kupp coming back. The injury, obviously, to Avonte Maddox has kind of messed up the Philadelphia secondary. Darius Slay went down for a little bit in the Washington game. I think the biggest weakness for the Rams right now is outside of Aaron Donald, their defensive line, along with their offensive line. In the trenches is where I think Philadelphia could potentially win that game. But the Rams, a lot of people like myself thought they were going to win 6-7 games, and to me, they're still a 6-7 win team. I thought Indy was going to win 7-8. I still think they're a 7-8 win team. Miami, Buffalo. Now, we all knew Miami was going to come back to earth, obviously scoring 70 points on the Atlas Denver Broncos. We knew it was, division game, defensive-minded head coach Sean McDermott. We knew Miami's offense wasn't going to be as explosive. What we didn't know is that Buffalo's was going to be just as explosive. And ever since the huge criticism of Josh Allen week 1 and the Buffalo Bills were saying Ken Dorsey isn't the right play caller, they're not using the running backs. They're too Josh Allen dependent. They're letting them, whip the ball 50 yards on the field into the short completions. When Josh Allen is playing composed and he is in rhythm, the Bills are still a very hard team. It's why I predicted them to just be a slight notch ahead of Miami in the AFC East this year. They meet up week 18 in Miami. That can determine still who wins the division. But at this point in time, I believe the Buffalo Bills are still the class of the AFC East. Okay, Denver, Chicago. This was a classic game between two bad football teams. Where Denver couldn't get anything going in the first half, Chicago had everything going. Justin Fields looked great. He only missed one pass. DJ Moore got a touchdown. Cole Kmet got a couple. Khalil Herbert got a couple. And then Chicago does what Chicago did, and they melted down, and Denver saved their season, though not for long, because they're still not a great football team, and Sean Payton's going to get rid of Russell Wilson at the end of this season, I believe. But we said going into this game, whoever loses this game, their season's over. That means for Chicago, it's over. A lot of people like Justin Fields coming out of that 2021 NFL draft. I was not the biggest fan of Fields. Nor am I the biggest fan of CJ Stroud. We'll see where he ends up. I just think in Ohio State, it's so easy to see those wide open NFL wide receivers that they have. It's a very tough adjustment. Now, as I've been saying with Chicago over the last couple of years, say what you want about Matt Nagy, but he won with Mitch Trubisky, and everybody makes fun of Matt Nagy, says he was a terrible coach. I'll tell you what, I'd rather have Matt Nagy calling the plays right now than Luke Getsy. I'd rather have Matt Nagy as my head coach in Chicago than Matt Eberflus. They need to blow it up. New GM, new regime, new coach. There's a lot to talk about there. Do they try to Will Lincoln Riley from the West Coast USC, Rich City, Chicago, down there in the Midwest with that weather? Do they try to bring Caleb Williams with him? I don't know about that, but I would certainly try. I think Chicago needs to embrace offense. I've been saying these defensive coaches on the National Football League are resilient, are incapable, I should say, of embracing the offense and embracing the quarterback position. Young quarterbacks, in my opinion, need great offensive coaches to just sort of develop and coddle them for the first few years of the league. And Justin Fields got that his rookie year, and then they fired him and they got him a defensive coach. It's been a disaster ever since. Russell Wilson had a good fourth quarter. Denver won the comeback. Not putting any stock into it as we get the Nathaniel Hackett Bowl between Jets and Broncos this weekend. Okay, I picked Carolina in my Survivor Bowl this week. I should have best bet them. That was my fault. They did cover, though. They looked sloppy in the first half. Kirk Cousins did not have a very good game. But the fact of the matter is, Carolina, my pick to win the NFC South. It's my biggest miss of the year by far. I thought Bryce Young was going to be really good with Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, Hayden Hurst, Miles Sanders, and it has just not happened. Listen, I think Carolina is going to go through some growing pains. They may win 4 games by year's end. They're not very good. They need to get a top pick in the draft. Maybe they, and their first round pick, by the way, is going to Chicago. So that's not good for them. They need to go out. They need to get a star receiver. If Davante Adams is indeed on the market, I would try to go get him. Bryce Young needs an absolute game changer as a number 1 wide receiver. We see their defense is good. We see what Kirk Cousins, by the way, does with Justin Jefferson. I still don't think Minnesota's on track this year. I think they won a lot of close games last year. I don't think they're as good as people think. I think they finished 7-8 wins. If they keep Kirk Cousins, then you may be looking at trading Kirk Cousins at the deadline with this rich quarterback class. The shock of the year so far may be Tampa Bay. I said going into the year, I thought Tampa Bay had a chance to be good, but I didn't trust Baker Mayfield. A lot of people like the Saints going into the year, and I said Derek Carr, yes, this is the best defense he's ever played with. Yes, arguably this is the best cast of weapons he's ever had. But he has a defensive head coach in Dennis Allen, and it is the Saints, and their roster is not as good as people think, and they're treading water. And I seem to be right on that. I think this is going to be a bust by the Saints. I think they're an okay team. I don't think they're great. And right now, what you believe for 4 weeks of the year, Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield, who has a resurgence underneath him. They do have Mike Evans. They do have Chris Godwin, out wide receiver. The unfortunate thing for Tampa Bay is they're winning these games in the richest quarterback class, we've seen in a long time. Because we know that Baker Mayfield is not a franchise quarterback. We know he can win you 7, 8, 9, 10 games. We know he can win you a playoff game. We know he's not taking you to the Super Bowl. But if you're Tampa Bay, do you sort of let this thing ride for 2 years, knowing you have 2 good wide receivers, knowing you have the likes of Devin White, Shaq Barrett, Villa on the defense side of the ball, knowing the way they're playing right now together, knowing that you could win the division and get an own playoff game in this putrid division because Atlanta doesn't have a quarterback, Carolina needs more weapons, and the Saints are just treading water. People, the Vegas fans that traveled to LA to watch the Raiders once again lose to the Chargers were telling their owner, Mark Davis, to fire Josh McDaniels. I do not blame them. Jimmy Garoppolo was obviously not in there. Aiden O'Connell got sacked 7 times. The Chargers almost blew it again. They do what the Chargers do, but ultimately the Raiders' defense is bad. They haven't been able to fix it in about a decade. They can move the ball, but it's Aiden O'Connell and it's not Jimmy Garoppolo. Chargers win Nothing to really take away here. San Francisco, Arizona tried to give him a good game. I'll give him this. Jonathan Gannon has those guys play hard, but at the end of the day, San Francisco's better than Arizona. They take apart Arizona. They cover the 14 points. They win 35-16. And now we get to the real 4 o'clock game in the afternoon. That's the New England Patriots, who I said going into the year could not beat good quarterbacks. I said Mac Jones is not very good. I said Bill O'Brien is not going to be able to fix the offense. I said they don't have any receivers. Their defense will have to keep them in every single game they are in, which they did for 3 games. And then Mac Jones turned the ball over, and then they got their doors blown off, and Bill Belichick had to bench Mac Jones against the Cowboys. That was a lifeless New England team from the start. It's a team that looked like they didn't believe they could win the game, but I'm going to bet you Bill Belichick is going to have them bounce back. That's one of my favorite bets this week. Saints got embarrassed last week by Tampa, but it's Derek Carr against Belichick. I think that's a low-scoring game, 2 defensive coaches. I think New England figures out how to win at home, because if they start 1-4, the talk of Bill Belichick retiring will obviously amp up. I thought Kansas City was going to blow the doors off the Jets 40-0, and it looked like it when they were up 17-0 in the first quarter. Kansas City kind of wet their foot off the gas pedal a little bit. They got some lucky with some holding calls, which I did not think there was a holding call on Sauce Gardner. I think Kansas City took the Jets lightly, which you should obviously never do, but I realize that it is human reaction. And they ended up still winning the game because Patrick Mahomes, even with his left and right tackle holding, and again, there is holding in the NFL on every play, Mahomes still made some key runs in that game. He was not his best throwing the football. And we talk about this a lot with Philadelphia so far this year. So, and to be fair to Kansas City, they are 3-1. They have found a way to win games regardless if they're playing well or not, and that's the most important thing early in the season, to win games. For the Jets, it's a confidence booster going into the Nathaniel Hackett Bowl next week against the Broncos, which we'll break down on Thursday. That's a very interesting game. I'm rooting for Nathaniel Hackett and the Jets in that game, and it's Zach Wilson versus Russell Wilson. What a special treat we have. And then obviously the Giants. I said they're bad. I don't know why the NFL tried to put them on prime time 3 times in 4 weeks. Geno Smith got into that little scuffle with Isaiah Simmons. It was really the only exciting part of the game, as Seattle took apart the Giants 24-3. Not a lot of real close games. Obviously the Colts come back against the Rams. Denver and Chicago made it interesting late. Obviously the Jets made it interesting late against Kansas City. But outside of that, Philadelphia, Washington was one of the only close games of the weekend. There was a lot of blowouts. There was a lot of bad teams. And this is what I believe we start to get now as we get into over the football season. We're starting to see the good teams become the good teams. We're starting to see the bad teams become the bad teams. And what we're seeing is, once again, smart, offensive, clever coaches that have the right quarterback, that have the offensive pieces, putting them in position. And the old, rigid, defensive-minded coaches, your Mike Tomlin, your Bill Belichick's, struggling to move the ball with mediocre quarterback play. And we're seeing guys like Daniel Jones can't move the ball. We're seeing Derek Carr struggle with Dennis Allen. So a lot of these teams are kind of who we thought they were. As we know, most of the NFL is going to be somewhere between about 8 and 10 wins. There's a couple up there with like 11, 12, 13. There's a couple towards the bottom with, 0, 2, 3, 4. But I would say about, 18 to 20 NFL teams are anywhere between that 8 and 10 range. And we're starting to see who's for real, who's okay, and who's just flat out trash. Once again, I went 12-4 in the money line. My only misses on the weekend was I missed Cincinnati against Tennessee, missed Pittsburgh against Houston, missed Indy against the Rams, and then I ended up missing on New Orleans against Tampa as well. 2 for 5 in best bets. Once again, hitting Jacksonville -3 against Atlanta. Seattle +1.5 last night against the Giants. Terribly missed the Steelers against the Texans. Indy almost came back and helped me out. They almost covered the 1.5, obviously losing in overtime to the Rams. And then Kansas City -9.5. They just did not cover. Though Mahomes runs into the end of the game, they could have. I kind of feel like that was a bad break. But that was my week 4 NFL recap. Like that clip from the Brand's World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brand's World podcast right here on YouTube.